Give me an example.
What
I know what that
happens?
means, but
What happens with an eating disorder primarily is that food becomes a way to regulate disruption, and whether that's
to regulate emotion,
emotion,
state.
yeah, it's emotional. Whether to regulate their environment, a person's environment. Sometimes, like if you think about it, a kid who's not having their needs met at home, maybe they have an alcoholic parent, for example, and that parent's coming in very inconsistent, so they don't have this consistency of having their needs met. So there's this inconsistent dynamic that they start to actually match within themselves, but also they may not be, dinner might not be on the table consistently either, and so they might start eating food or hiding food, or to feel better from that emotional neglect almost.
Turmoil.
Food tastes good, and it actually affects the brain in a certain way, and so kids learn immediately that that's something that they can resource within themselves to feel better, that they can create that consistency. So it can start that way, or it could be, there's so many ways it comes through, but it could be a young athlete, or the teachers, or there's so many ways that kids get a message about self that they feel that they have to try to make it better, or they're trying to just from a very baseline feel better, feel more loved, or feel more safe, or feel more whatever. So there's a regulate, so the food can regulate things. So it can translate, a typical, description might be that a person's trying to regulate control of their environment. If they might have some inconsistency, they don't feel safe, or it's temperamental. So anorexia, typically if you look at someone with anorexia, they're usually incredibly talented, driven, very functional, and they might be the envy of everybody else in the room, but behind the scenes they're driving themselves almost to death with how restrictive they are with the food, or going to the gym, or walking 12 hours at night by themselves in the dark streets. Totally extreme. So what happens is they go to regulate a need, and it's kind of ass over tit. It starts to take over.
Did you just say that on my show?
Oh my God. Edit that. No, the thing about it is it starts with an element of trying to control. It could start with someone just going on a diet, and if that temperament is there, it could shift into that. And I mean, there's so many people that I'm counseling after 12, 20 years of their eating disorder that started out with them just wanting to try to lose weight. So that's why sometimes that diet conversation can get a little tricky, because sometimes that information is like putting bullets in someone's gun. So yeah. It's like loading it. So you don't know all the time who that person is, what they're dealing with. That's why it's an emotional piece. And you have to understand what that person's relationship is to their needs. And if it's from a place of truly wanting to nurture themselves and love themselves, that's ultimately the goal with like nurturing and feeding yourself, because food's great. Food's amazing. I mean, I'm a chef. I love cooking. I love cooking for my friends. I love having dinner parties. And I don't like to have a lot of limits on, like, I can't eat that, blah, blah, blah.
Restrictions.
It's just like how I feel and how it's integrated in my own experience is really the ultimate ability to nurture and really sustain, like, and ultimately nourish yourself. So it's less external and it's more internal. But that sometimes takes a long time to get to. So, but in dealing with an eating disorder, you're dealing with someone that relationship is super broken down, and they're oftentimes near death. I mean, so sometimes the acuity I work with is often, they're phobic of food at this point. They can't feed themselves, or they can't feed themselves without purging it, or they could be not. And if you look at basic needs, so if you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have like food, hydration, environment, shelter, movement. if you look at someone with an eating disorder, and on top of that triangle is like self-actualization, self-esteem, all that stuff. Everybody's trying to get that. Everybody wants to feel good about themselves. Everybody wants to love themselves. But interestingly enough, the foundation of that is your basic relationship to physical needs. If you look at someone with an eating disorder, there's a disruption almost in every single one. So whether it's with elimination, elimination, sometimes they're, you look at laxative abuse, all of that. You look at movement, there's complete disruption there. They're either totally not moving or absolutely just killing themselves with the stress of it. And then you have the food, and then isolation, often with loving touch and everything. There's a lot of isolation that's attached to it. And then, so it's almost like there's this magical thinking that I can get away with not, like, I'll be okay if I'll be fine if I don't eat, but everybody else needs to, or I can, so there's a real disruption in all of it. So then that affects everything that comes beyond that.
So